On April 11, 2007, a 6-year-old girl found her mother unconscious in the bathtub of their Pleasant Grove, Utah home. Her father, a respected physician and lawyer named Martin MacNeill, called 911, and by the time paramedics arrived, Michelle MacNeill was already gone. She was 50 years old, a former beauty queen, a mother of 8 children. The initial investigation concluded she had passed away while recovering from a facelift. Case closed. But what police didn't know was that Michelle's daughters were about to start their own investigation, one that would take 6 years and uncover a web of lies, affairs, identity theft, and a crime so calculated that prosecutors would later call it almost perfect. Michelle Marie Summers grew up in Concord, California, where she played violin, acted, and was a cheerleader and homecoming queen. She was a straight-A student, and in 1976, she was crowned Miss Concord. She was also deeply devoted to her faith as an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Michelle worked as an exchange student in Switzerland and as a model. By all accounts, she was vibrant, intelligent, and had her whole life ahead of her. Then she met Martin MacNeill. Martin MacNeill was a physician practicing in Pleasant Grove and had served in the military. He had received a law degree, though he did not practice law, and had served as an LDS bishop, which is a lay leader of a congregation. He was also the medical director of Utah State Development Center in American Fork. To the outside world, he seemed like the perfect match for Michelle. They married and built what appeared to be an ideal life together. They were married for nearly 30 years and had 8 children, 4 of whom were adopted. But behind closed doors, Martin MacNeill was living a double life. Investigators later determined that Martin had falsified university transcripts to enter the California Medical School, where he earned his degree in osteopathic medicine, and also falsified his later application to law school. This was a man who had been lying about who he was from the very beginning, and those lies only got worse. According to Michelle's daughter Rachel, Michelle heard Martin threaten harmful actions against himself many times. In 1994, Martin was accused of having inappropriate relations with a patient and made threats. In August 2000, Martin made threats while holding a knife after Michelle caught him looking at inappropriate content. In 2005, Martin made similar threats when Michelle caught him looking at such content again. This wasn't just a troubled marriage. This was a pattern of manipulation and control. In November 2005, Martin met a woman named Gypsy Willis online and began a relationship with her. Willis says they met through Yahoo Members, where MacNeill jokingly accused her of trying to be smarter than she was when she posted, "What do you know about quantum physics?" They instant messaged back and forth for about 3 weeks before meeting in person at a Thanksgiving Point restaurant in November 2005. According to Willis's testimony, the relationship did not become romantic until January of 2006. Living 2 counties away, Willis said she and MacNeill would see each other a couple times a month. By February 2007, Michelle's suspicions that her husband was having an affair increased, and she confronted him repeatedly. Michelle knew something was wrong. She had seen Gypsy's number showing up multiple times on their phone bill, but what she didn't know was that her husband was already planning to get rid of her. In March 2007, Martin MacNeill presented the idea to Michelle of having cosmetic surgery. Michelle was reluctant to have the surgery performed in the short term, preferring to postpone the operation for health reasons. She wanted to lose some weight first and get her high blood pressure under control. But Martin wouldn't let it go. He was relentless. Family members say Michelle MacNeill pushed back, not because she was refusing, but because she wanted to lose some extra weight and wanted to control her high blood pressure. But prosecutors say Martin MacNeill was relentless, even finding a plastic surgeon who was new to town and had advertised in the local paper. The surgeon he found was Dr. Scott Thompson. Dr. Thompson testified that Michelle showed no signs of heart disease during a preoperative exam on March 29, 2007, but she did have high blood pressure and told him she was depressed and stressed. He recommended that Michelle postpone the procedure until she could lower her blood pressure, and he prescribed her Zoloft. But Martin disagreed. According to Dr. Thompson, Martin MacNeill's disagreement with his opinion was animated. MacNeill accompanied his wife on every pre-surgical visit to Dr. Thompson. The last consultation before the procedure took place was on April 1, 2007. Martin gave Thompson a list of medications he wanted for Michelle. They included Lortab, which is hydrocodone in liquid form, zolpidem, Valium, which is diazepam, Phenergan, which is promethazine, and Percocet, which is oxycodone. At Martin's request, the operating surgeon prescribed 4 medicines for Michelle's recovery. 2 of the drugs, diazepam and oxycodone, would not normally be prescribed to his patients. This was highly unusual. Dr. Thompson later testified that he was surprised by the combination and strength of medications Martin was requesting. When asked his opinion of Martin MacNeill as a doctor, Thompson testified that he believed the defendant had a tendency to overprescribe medication for his patients. The facelift was performed on April 3, 2007. After the cosmetic surgery, Thompson required Michelle MacNeill to spend the night at the hospital. According to prosecutors, Martin MacNeill exchanged 24 text messages with Gypsy Willis on the day of Michelle's surgery. While his wife was in the hospital recovering from surgery he had pressured her into getting, Martin was texting his mistress. On April 4th, Michelle MacNeill was released to go home. Her daughter Alexis MacNeill was on spring break from medical school and attended to her mother at home. Alexis was in medical school at the time, so she knew how to properly care for her mother. But something wasn't right. Michelle was lethargic and unresponsive when daughter Alexis tried to wake her. Alexis took over care after her father told her he probably over-medicated the woman. Think about that for a second. Martin MacNeill, a physician, admitted to his daughter that he had given Michelle too much medication. This should have been a huge red flag. Michelle had been concerned during her recovery that Martin was having an affair and that she had been given medication by him inappropriately. Her daughter Alexis, a medical student at that time, then took responsibility for giving Michelle her medicine. Michelle trusted her daughter more than she trusted her own husband, and she had good reason to. On April 6, 2007, Michelle told Alexis, "If anything happens to me, make sure it was not your dad." Those words would haunt Alexis forever. Michelle recovered sufficiently for Alexis to return to school on April 10, 2007, believing that her mother's recovery was well underway. The following day, April 11, 2007, Michelle MacNeill and Alexis talked at 8:44 a.m., and Michelle said that she was doing well. At 9:10 a.m., Martin called Alexis asking her to call her mother, saying he was concerned that she wasn't doing well and wasn't getting out of bed. But here's where Martin's story starts falling apart. Although Martin said that he was at work in the morning, he was not seen in public until 11 a.m., when he arrived at a local safety fair. So where was he between 8:44 a.m., when Michelle talked to Alexis, and 11 a.m.? What happened during those missing hours? Michelle passed away at the age of 50 in the bathtub of her home in Pleasant Grove. Michelle MacNeill was found unconscious in her bathtub by her then 6-year-old daughter, Ada. The child was sent by her father to a neighbor's house to get help, and eventually Michelle MacNeill was pulled from the bathtub by a neighbor and Martin MacNeill. The two attempted CPR before medical crews arrived. Those medical crews also attempted to perform life-saving efforts before Michelle MacNeill was taken to American Fork Hospital, where she was pronounced deceased. When emergency workers arrived at the Pleasant Grove home, they found Martin MacNeill, according to law enforcement at the scene, hysterical and angry, expressing frustration about his wife having had a recent facelift. This behavior struck first responders as odd. His wife had just passed away, and he was angry at her? The autopsy report determined she passed away from natural causes due to cardiovascular disease. Case closed. Or so it seemed. But Michelle's family wasn't buying it. The couple's daughter, Alexis, believed that there was something more sinister at play, and that her father was responsible. She and other family members kept the heat on the case. "I'd try to go to the authorities. I'd go to the governor's office," said Alexis. "I went to every single newspaper in Utah trying to get someone to listen. I cannot understand why no one would listen. My mother was gone and no one cares." For 3 years, Alexis and her sister Rachel, along with their aunt, Michelle's sister, fought to get someone to listen to them. They knew their father had taken their mother's life. They just had to prove it. And if what happened next didn't convince investigators that something was seriously wrong, I don't know what would. Just days after Michelle's passing, Martin's behavior became even more suspicious. On April 14, 2007, Martin spoke at his wife's funeral but only mentioned Michelle in passing. At his own wife's funeral, he barely talked about her. Then, just 3 days later, something truly bizarre happened. On April 17, 2007, Martin asked his daughter Rachel to go to Mount Timpanogos Temple with him to pray about a nanny. His mistress, Gypsy Willis, approached them in what Rachel called a scripted encounter. Martin was setting up an accidental meeting with his mistress at a temple, making it seem like divine intervention that they found a nanny. Gypsy Willis testified that she moved into his house 9 days after Michelle's passing. 9 days. In May 2007, Willis moved into the family's Pleasant Grove home as nanny. But here's the thing. Gypsy Willis wasn't actually taking care of the children. In June 2007, police were called as Martin kicked out daughters Rachel and Alexis from home after they said they asked why Willis didn't cook, clean, or take care of the children. When his daughters questioned why this supposed nanny wasn't actually doing any nanny duties, Martin kicked them out of the house. His own daughters, just weeks after their mother passed away. If you're as obsessed with unraveling the psychology behind these cases as I am, hit that subscribe button right now for Accused. We dive deep into the stories that keep you up at night, and trust me, this one gets even darker. Sometime in 2007, Martin changed his will to give just $1 to each of his children, with everything else to go to Willis under her false identity, according to investigators. He was planning to cut his own children out of his life completely. On July 20th, 2007, Martin and Willis obtained a marriage license but never married. And then came perhaps the most disturbing part of all. In July 2007, Martin's daughter Giselle MacNeill returned to Ukraine to visit her biological sister for summer. Family and investigators believe Martin planned for the trip to be permanent and a ploy to steal her identity. That's right. Martin was planning to send one of his adopted daughters back to Ukraine permanently so he could steal her identity and use it to help his mistress. In 2009, Martin was sentenced to 4 years in prison for federal identity theft charges. He had used the identifying information from his adopted daughter Giselle to obtain false legal documents for his girlfriend Gypsy Willis in Giselle's name. His stated motive was tax evasion, as Willis owed substantial sums to the Internal Revenue Service and Martin wished to avoid any possible liability for these debts. In January 2009, Willis was indicted on 11 similar charges. In September 2009, Willis was sentenced to 21 months in federal prison, but began her sentence a month earlier than scheduled after prosecutors said she planned to flee to Mexico. While Martin and Gypsy were in prison for identity theft, Alexis and Rachel continued their fight to get their mother's case investigated. 3 years after Michelle's passing, at the urging of her children, there was a new analysis of a toxicology report that changed everything. Combinations of medications found in Michelle MacNeill's system were determined to have contributed to her passing. Diazepam, oxycodone, promethazine, and zolpidem were all found in her system. Toxicology reports revealed that the victim had painkillers and sedatives like oxycodone, Valium, Lortab, and Ambien in her system. On October 6, 2010, Michelle MacNeill's cause of death was changed to combined effects of heart disease and drug toxicity. The manner of death was changed from natural to undetermined. Martin was released from prison on the identity theft charges in July 2012. On August 24, 2012, the Utah County Attorney's Office charged Martin with ending his wife's life in 2007. Finally, after 5 years of fighting, Alexis and Rachel had gotten someone to listen. Martin MacNeill's trial began on October 17, 2013. The 22-day trial was litigated by Chief Prosecutor Chad Grunander, and Martin MacNeill's defense team included Randall Spencer and Suzanne Gustin. The prosecution had to overcome a major obstacle. The state medical examiner's office has never ruled the death a homicide. So how do you prove this kind of crime when the manner of death is undetermined? In his closing statement to the jury, Grunander stated, "It was an almost perfect crime. MacNeill pumped her full of drugs that he knew would be difficult to detect once she was gone." Prosecutors weaved a narrative that focused on Martin MacNeill's bad or odd behavior, including the growing seriousness of his affair with Willis, his insistence that his wife have a facelift, asking that extra medications be prescribed to her, and his reaction to his wife's passing, all pointing to his guilt. The prosecution brought in witness after witness. During the trial, a previous mistress of Martin MacNeill testified that MacNeill had stated that there was a way to end someone's life that would appear to be a natural heart attack. He had literally told a previous mistress about how to commit the perfect crime. Fellow inmates claimed that MacNeill had claimed he was responsible for his wife's passing, but it could not be proven. One inmate said that MacNeill told him Michelle was in the way, that she wanted the house and the kids, and that he wanted something else. Gypsy Willis took the stand as a hostile witness. The judge allowed prosecutors to aggressively question Gypsy Willis as a hostile witness after they argued she was trying to protect Martin MacNeill with less than truthful answers. Willis testified that she moved into his house 9 days after the incident and received a marriage proposal and a $7,000 diamond ring from the defendant within months. Even Gypsy's roommates had disturbing things to say. According to testimony, Gypsy's roommates said she had talked about harming Michelle by either poisoning her or tampering with her car's brake lines. The defense claimed that MacNeill had overdosed on her prescribed medication and fallen into the bathtub. Martin MacNeill used an alibi defense. His attorney argued he was at work at the time of his wife's passing. His attorney also argued there was reasonable doubt, pointing to the inconclusive autopsy and the circumstantial evidence. His defense attorney even acknowledged at the start of the trial that Martin had made poor choices in his life and had affairs during his marriage. She told the jury, "We may think he is a total jerk. That is absolutely disgusting, and that's natural. But it's very critical that during this trial you set aside your emotion." The jury deliberated for 11 hours. The jurors spent 11 hours deliberating. They said they discussed the case for 5 or 6 hours before taking a vote to see how far along they were. They said at that point they were all convinced that MacNeill carried out a cold, calculated plan against his wife. The jury foreman later said, "A lot of the information was circumstantial. But as one juror explained, we felt there were too many circumstances to all have happened, coincidentally within such a short time frame that did not have a logical explanation." One juror said that MacNeill texting Gypsy Willis right after Michelle's passing, and during her funeral, even moving her into his home under the guise of the nanny only days later, was disturbing to jurors. They said it was also disturbing how MacNeill had a plan to make Gypsy look like an answer to prayer. Another juror said the stage temple encounter was really just a phony staged thing to get her in their life in a nice way, when MacNeill flushed his wife's pills immediately after her, passing with a witness present. One juror said that was extremely telling. "He knew there were pills involved because he had something to do with it," the juror said. Those kind of calculating actions were kind of the best illustration of a calculating personality. On November 9th, 2013, the jury found MacNeill guilty of the first-degree ending of his wife Michelle's life on April 11th, 2007. They also found him guilty of obstruction of justice. 7 years, 5 months, and 8 days after Michelle MacNeill's passing, Alexis stood before a judge and asked that the man convicted as her mother's killer, her own father, spend the rest of his life in prison. "She was taken from us and robbed of her life," Alexis said. "We were all robbed of so much happiness and joy." Martin MacNeill was sentenced to 17 years to life. Judge Derek Pullen sentenced Martin MacNeill to spend 15 years to life in prison for the conviction, plus another one to 15 years in prison for obstruction of justice. But the case wasn't over yet. In a separate trial in 2014, MacNeill was convicted of inappropriately touching his daughter Alexis on May 23, 2007, 5 weeks after the passing of his wife. It took 8 jurors less than 2.5 hours to find Martin MacNeill guilty. "He's a predator," Alexis said after the verdict was read. "There's some justice." The jury once again saw the truth. Judge Pullen made the sentences in the case run consecutive to a 1 to 15-year prison sentence ordered for the inappropriate contact conviction. MacNeill's first possible parole date had been set for August 2052, when he would have been 96 years old. But he would never make it to that date. On April 9, 2017, Martin MacNeill, 61, passed away at the Utah State Prison, where he was serving a lengthy sentence. He was found by 2 prison inmates near a greenhouse in the Olympus section of the prison. Investigators wrote that it appeared as if MacNeill had ended his own life. Officials noted that MacNeill, who was authorized to work in the greenhouse, did this in an area where he could not be seen. Martin MacNeill's passing at the Utah State Prison was officially ruled as such. This case shows us something important about how we view people in positions of power and trust. Martin MacNeill was a doctor, a lawyer, a Sunday school teacher, a respected member of his community. People couldn't imagine that someone like him could be capable of such actions. But Michelle's daughters knew better. They knew their father was a liar, a manipulator, and someone who had taken their mother's life. And they fought for 6 years to make sure he was held accountable. The Martin MacNeill case also shows us the importance of listening to family members when they say something is wrong. For 3 years, Alexis and Rachel tried to get anyone, to listen to them. They went to the governor's office, to newspapers, to anyone who would hear them. And they were ignored. It wasn't until they got Michelle's toxicology report reanalyzed that investigators finally took another look at the case. How many other cases are out there where family members know the truth but can't get anyone to listen? What Martin MacNeill did to Michelle was cold and calculated. He pressured her into surgery she didn't want. He insisted on medications that were dangerous and unnecessary. He over-medicated her when she was recovering. And then, on April 11, 2007, when Alexis was back at school and couldn't protect her mother anymore, he made his move. The prosecution believed he gave Michelle a dangerous combination of drugs and then staged it to look like an accident. And it almost worked. If it hadn't been for Michelle's daughters refusing to give up, Martin MacNeill might have gotten away with it. Think about Michelle's last words to Alexis. "If anything happens to me, make sure it was not your dad." She knew. On some level, she knew her husband was dangerous. She knew he was capable of hurting her. But like so many victims in controlling relationships, she may have felt trapped. She had 8 children with this man. She had built a life with him. Leaving would have meant tearing apart everything she knew. And in the end, staying cost her everything. This case reminds us that dangerous people don't always look dangerous. Sometimes they look like doctors, like lawyers, like Sunday school teachers. Sometimes they're the people we trust the most. And that's what makes them so concerning. Martin MacNeill used his position, his knowledge, and his charm to manipulate everyone around him. He manipulated Michelle into getting surgery. He manipulated doctors into prescribing dangerous medications. He manipulated his mistress into moving into his house days after his wife passed away. He even manipulated the justice system for years, making it look like Michelle's passing was an accident, but he couldn't manipulate Alexis and Rachel. They saw through him. They knew what he was. And they made sure the world knew too. Justice for Michelle came too late, but it came. And that's because her daughters never stopped fighting for her. If you or someone you know is experiencing a controlling or harmful relationship, please reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day at 1-800-799-7233. You can also text START to 88788 or visit thehotline.org. Remember, control, manipulation, and isolation are warning signs. And if someone tells you they're afraid of their partner, believe them. Michelle told Alexis to make sure it wasn't her dad if anything happened. Alexis listened. We should all be so willing to listen when someone tells us they're in danger. The Martin MacNeill case will always be remembered as one of the most calculated crimes in recent history. A doctor who used his medical knowledge to harm his wife and almost got away with it. A father who was willing to destroy his children's lives to be with his mistress. A man who thought he was smarter than everyone else, but in the end was brought down by the 2 people who knew him best. His daughters. Michelle's legacy lives on through Alexis and Rachel, who fought for justice when no one else would. They made sure their mother's voice was heard, even after she was gone. And that's the most powerful thing of all.